Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. Well, Paul, people don't realize it yet, but yesterday's summit in Alaska is far more important than anyone can imagine and is very much could be a turning point in history.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those situations where everyone was expecting certain things to happen and perceives those things to be important. And in the grand scheme of things, eventually they will be important. But sometimes things go on in summits that get lost in amongst all the kind of hype, in amongst all the belief that somehow some major development was going to come out of this. At best, you could have expected them to have reached a ceasefire, but that was never going to be the case because Russia made the point, look, if you're going to have a ceasefire, who's going to implement it? Who's going to make sure that it's enforced? How is it going to be enforced specifically along the contact line? Because the contact lines, well, it's broken and fragmented, but it's 1,200 kilometers long, etc., etc. And at the very least, Russia would have said, well, we want to ensure that all Ukrainian forces leave. Well, they're not really in Lugansk anymore, but Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, and in totality, never to return. And that would never have been something that you could have sold to anyone at this point in time. So, therefore, if a ceasefire doesn't have to take place, there's no way you're going to reach an agreement to then say here's a permanent peace agreement to be put in place. But the thing is, they did talk for 3 hours. So the question is, what did they talk about now? Trump came out and said there's no deal until there's a deal. So, no, there is no deal. There's no ceasefire. In principle, there's nothing of great substance to report. But both sides said there was some progress made. They didn't give any details as to what that progress was. They also tellingly had a press conference, and we'll come on to that shortly, where it's traditional if you're the sitting president, so to speak, so because Trump is. He was in Alaska. Trump goes first, Putin goes second. Well, Trump didn't go first, Putin went first, and largely did all the talking. Trump said very little, but most tellingly, the one thing that was very clear is the entire US contingent, to include Trump, obviously Rubio, it included Witkoff, and obviously Bassent, etc. Now, none of them said anything. They looked, to be honest, a bit crestfallen, a bit humbled, as though we've got nothing to say. Not and Trump, as I said in the press conference, was just very low key. No bombastic language, nothing. And that's because effectively the Russians, as we said in a previous podcast, Russia was issuing the ultimatums, not the Americans. The Americans were not going to sit there anymore and shout their mouth off about sanctions. Okay, we're not saying that has completely gone away, although it's meaningless. There are tariffs, or we're going to arm the Ukrainians, or whatever else they want to say. None of that came about. It was complete stone wall silence. And that because, in essence, the Russians came along, gave them what the ultimatums are, saying this is how A, you're going to end the war, and B, how we're going to put into place measures that ensures that not only does the war end, but the war never starts again. And what does that mean for, in the broader context, for European allies and Ukraine going forward? And really, I think what set the tone for me, at least, was when Putin arrives. Trump's waiting for him. They put the red carpet out. They greet each other and they're clearly talking in English because Putin can speak English. He doesn't generally do it. I think that's testimony to the fact that he does hold Trump in some high regard, and that might surprise people. But I think he does. And I think he thinks that Trump wants to achieve certain objectives with regards to Ukraine, and we'll come on to those shortly. But they spoke, and I think that conversation and what was said in those few minutes till they walked and got in the car and then drove to the venue where the talks took place was probably the most telling aspect, because that would have been the point when Putin would have said to Trump, look, this is the gist of what we need to do. This is how it's going to happen. I'm going to explain everything so you fully understand what you're dealing with. Because it's absolutely clear as day follows night, doesn't have any understanding of what went on in Ukraine, what caused the war from Russia's perspective, and people will disagree. That's fine, but it doesn't matter anymore whether people agree or disagree. The war will end on Russia's terms. Russia is winning the war, and whether they like that or not is irrelevant. The relevant fact is it's not going to end on some watered down, spurious basis that somehow would allow Ukraine to appear to be the victor or not to be defeated. But equally, it's not about winning or losing, because no one wins a war, but it's about making sure you end the war forever. So we never come back to this issue in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or whenever it is. Because Ukraine has been suffering from these problems really since World War II. And before that, I'm no great, the best historian about Ukraine, but it's been bedeviled by huge problems. They have to end forever. We cannot go through this ever again. And this is why, based on those discussions, and we'll come on to that in a minute because I'll give way to Ken, this is why you can arguably say it is a huge turning point in history. And largely at this point in time, that won't make any sense to people because they'll think nothing happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that I think is hardly at all being discussed. I believe you and I may have broached this behind the scenes talking over the last few days. But the most important work, I think, was done not at the summit, but when Witkoff was in Moscow. And probably all the preparations, all the agreements, all the recognitions and such were done there, coming to some type of point where both Trump and Putin would be amenable and saying, you know what? This is a very good path to achieving what we both want. And I think if it wasn't for that, then this rush job meeting set up in Alaska would not have taken place. So, you're not going to be able to resolve the all the ails of the world in just 3.5, 4 hour communication. But what was done, I believe, in Moscow with Witkoff set up the ability for the two men to meet face to face, to look each other in the eyes, look at the body language, and say, you know what? Not only do we agree that you have national security issues and the right to protect what is yours, but also let's figure out a way to make this beneficial to both the United States and to Trump. And you saw that primarily in the speech that Putin did, where he brought up that if you had been president the last 4 years, this conflict would have never stopped. Sticking it to Biden and giving Trump the props, that he believes he deserves. And when you're talking about with President Trump, it's a combination of you have to get some actual tangible results, but also feed his ego. And it was a great combination of both. Putin is highly intelligent enough to be able to set the argument and the debate in that relevance, And one of the other things that sort of was missed was while uh, the Trump administration has been de demanding to put sanctions on India regarding buying Russian oil, China then replaced India over the last couple of weeks and has been buying that oil. Trump came out and specifically said, we're not going to put sanctions on China regarding this. They can go ahead and do it. So there are a lot of things that did take place that instantaneously you can see by the policy change as well as the demeanor that I think Trump is on board for this. And, I had a discussion with some family members over they were asking about it and what was going on. And they said, I believe that Putin and Trump are pretty much entirely on the same page. It's all going to depend on what Europe and Zelensky does, and if Trump can be able to put the thumb on them and say, "Enough, you are children, get in line," and that's going to be that.
Yeah, it also is very telling that Putin said that he saw that the administration and Trump personally wanted to resolve the Ukrainian conflict. And he said his strive to get to the crux of the matter, to understand this history, is precious. There you go. There's the big clue. We told him everything, and now he understands it all. Now he knows why and why the situation in Ukraine, as far as Russia's concerned, whether people agree or not, again, is irrelevant, to do with fundamental threats to the security of Russia, vis-a-vis, obviously, Ukrainian membership or potential membership or perceived membership of NATO. So, in essence, what will have been said to Trump is, look, this is the history of Ukraine. This is what's gone on. This is what you're clearly have never been told. I wouldn't be surprised if no one who attended that meeting has any understanding of this to any appreciable extent. But also, here's the core issues. And the war is not going to end unless those core issues are dealt with. And we don't need to repeat all those, but the obvious ones: no NATO membership, neutrality, demilitarization, etc., etc. And it's been made clear to Trump the war will carry on until those core issues are dealt with. They can either be settled on the battlefield, which is nobody should want to happen, clearly, or we can reach a peace agreement, but you're going to have to address them in a peace agreement. It's these kind of brutal realities that the United States and Trump needs to understand. It sounds incredible they don't understand, but we keep hearing repeatedly statements coming out of Trump officials and his administration that, oh, we're finally starting to understand what the issue is with Russia. And you would think, how can they possibly not understand it? Well, believe it or not, they absolutely don't understand things because these people live in bubbles and a bubble of ignorance, and they have no real concept or understanding of what is going on and why it's going on. The other point that Putin made, and this is a real carrot to dangle with the Americans: the US economy's screwed, its financial system's screwed. It desperately needs energy in the future because shale oil and gas is in decline. In a relatively short order, the US is going to be dependent on other countries for energy. People will say that's not happening. Well, it is happening. Hence why Putin makes the point there is tremendous potential for US and Russian investment and business cooperation in trade, high technologies. Hence, he makes reference to Arctic, and we've spoken about the Arctic. And this is why the Arctic's really important. And people go, oh, it's boring, I don't care. Well, you're missing a huge point if you think it is. And I've spent years talking about the Russian Far East, and Putin makes reference how they can have cooperation between the Far East of Russia and the West Coast of the US. Now, if you dangle a carrot that says we can really do a lot to help your economy in the future, give you access to raw materials, and energy. But here's the kicker with this. In order to do that, you're going to have to satisfy a whole bunch of things, which means you'll say hegemony's gone, dead, buried, over. Hence, why the world could, or you could arguably look at this summit and go, it's a turning point in history. Because this is an opportunity for the United States to rectify huge problems it has domestically, but it's going to have to make a huge amount of concessions in order for that to happen. Hence, the bewildered look, hence, everyone being very quiet and subdued on the US side and having to reflect upon undoubtedly the US cares about, or Trump wants the nation to be prosperous. All the policy initiatives like tariffs and all these are just a disaster. All these fake deals that have no backbone or substance to them is another example. With Russia, it can be real, it can be tangible, but also if the United States has huge investment and its future tied up in Russia to a large extent, what does that mean? It's not going to want to go around upsetting the Russians anymore. Because if they do, Russia could just tell the Americans it's over. All these projects and developments are on Russian soil. You could just kick everyone out, and what does the US do then? They're in big trouble. So this is a way of forcing the US's hand economically to go, well, if you this is your answer to your prayer, so to speak. This is a way out of the problem, but you're going to have to resolve all these other issues, all these ultimatums in order to achieve that objective. And there is no doubt the reference to the Arctic and, of course, the Russian Far East is clearly indicating that's exactly what was said within those discussions.
When I made the point, and this is something when we mention both in the title and in the intro and as part of this discussion that this is a historic and a change in history. You take a look at immediately what happened after the press conference. The mainstream media instantaneously, it was just like it was 5, 10 years ago. Trump's getting played. He's a Putin stooge, and they just pulled out the old bag of tricks. They want to scuttle this as much as possible. The old system. And there was a statement that was put out by the EU leadership. Now, I don't know if this came before or after the Trump called Europe on this, but they're playing the same games. They're saying they welcome Trump's push to end the war in Ukraine, but they signaled that these are the demands we must have. Ukraine must receive ironclad security guarantees with no restrictions on its military or foreign partnerships, aka joining NATO. Sovereignty. Territorial decisions rest with Ukraine. Borders cannot be changed by force, i.e., Russia's got to give back the territory it's residing in. Western support. The U.S. and Europe pledge continued military and economic backing and sanctions pressure on Russia. So Europe, with that statement alone, has really no desire or intention to end this conflict. They have too much at stake. They have put too much back behind it. They will lose so much economically and politically if the conflict was to end. And so really, if President Trump and Putin are on the same page with this, it's going to totally demolish Europe's ability to have any authority in foreign policy going forward.
Well, yeah, actually those comments were came out. There was a meeting, I guess, a Zoom call probably amongst the ambassadors from 27 EU countries this morning after, so hastily arranged, and they all came out with those exact statements. But they're words, they're meaningless, because what's Europe going to do without the United States backing? Yeah, okay, there's the argument, and no doubt this was mentioned. Look, you want to end the war and you want to have trade with us, but You still want to sell arms to the Europeans who are then going to give them to Ukrainians. Well, that's something that would have to be written into any future peace agreement. That is not happening. So therefore, what's Europe going to give them? Europe's bankrupt anyway. Europe's not got a lot to give them. And, they can sit there and make these statements, but, without the Americans, the Chihuahuas are going to keep wild, going to yap anymore and hide behind the Rottweiler, so to speak. They will make statements and they'll keep saying this. Europe's problem isn't really as much to do with they want to keep the war going because they think if Ukraine loses, that Russia will take control of the whole of Europe. No, that's the absolutely ridiculous mindset. And they believe this. They're not imagining, we're not, sorry, they are imagining this is going to happen, but it's so powerful in their minds that it's reality. And therefore, they think, well, we just have to hope that if we keep this war going, that Russia will eventually lose. And then when they've lost, then that's the end. And we can all breathe a sigh of relief. Not that Russia's ever going to be interested in taking any other European country or the whole of Ukraine for that matter. So, yes, they're going to not change their opinion publicly, but eventually. If the US does what it thinks or what we hope it does, then Europe and Zelensky will just have to cave in and do as they're told. They won't be in a position to make any statements. They could potentially cause problems, and Putin alluded to that in this press conference. We just hope they don't try and throw a spanner in the works. But I think the Americans are now too aware of realities to fall for that nonsense. The only thing that's potentially a big fly in the ointment is Trump can get home and then interested parties will try and twist his arm to walk away from whatever they agreed to. Well, not in writing, of course, at this point in time. And that is entirely possible. And then, next week Trump will be putting sanctions on Russia again because he's under pressure to do so, etc., etc. And therefore, we can't dismiss the fact that this may end up not fulfilling its objectives, but in the end, one way or the other, the Ukraine war will end. And however the Ukraine war ends is going to redefine history. There is going to be this massive change that will happen inside Europe, inside the United States, what happens to NATO, etc. So the end of the day, from the US's perspective, it's better they end it in a way that they can somehow come out of this not looking like they failed. They pin it all on Biden, find a way to look like we're the peacemakers. We can also benefit enormously financially, economically from changing relations with the Russians. So, this could end up a win-win for Trump. But that window of opportunity is narrowing rapidly. So yeah, the decision with regards to Europe disagreeing with them. Well, at the end of the day, how much does it really matter? Because Europe is not in a position to actually make any decisions on its own. Militarily, it's totally at the behest of the US. That's part of how NATO operates, with the US running the show. So they can't really make any decisions anyway. And they certainly can't use weapons of any substance and ship them to Ukraine, because the United States will go, there is no Article 5. You're on your own. If you want to be obliterated, that's your choice. We're not going to support you. We're not going to defend you. So, and they kind of know that now anyway. So yeah, they can sit there and make statements, but let's see what really happens if the US follows through on what was clearly discussed and agreed to okay, it's not written in stone, so again, that's subject to change. But if they stick by their policy decisions, then Europe and Zelensky will have to fall into line very, very rapidly. And therefore it becomes irrelevant what they say and what they do. And but because at the end of the day, Europe is not in a position to support them anyway. And when Ukraine runs out of everything, which they rapidly are, then what happens? Russia will just take 200 square miles a day of territory, whatever. The war will be over. And then, as would have been pointed out to Trump, the fallout's going to be far worse for the West the longer this war drags on. If we get an agreement now, but in a few weeks, that won't apply anymore. So the choice is yours. It's rather like Istanbul. Istanbul would have been that Russia didn't now have any of these regions as part of the Russian Federation. But as time passes by, the Russian demands grow, and the fallout for the West is greater, and also for Ukraine as a result of this. So the question is, in all these situations, is if the US really understands the gravity, which I think they now do, about what's going on in Ukraine, they're going to realize that the danger that Ukraine poses to the whole of Europe in the future, and not just what's going on in the context of the war. I think, have I lost you, Ken? Well, anyway, if I have,
Oh, yeah. So,
oh,
sorry about that. I had the mute button on.
that's okay.
Anyway, I just wanted to finish my side with a couple points that you aptly made. Going back to 2016, in the first Trump administration, he made great headway with uh, agreements with Putin, Xi, and of course Kim Jong Un. Well, he came back, and there were certain advisors in his cabinet that scuttled the whole thing and destroyed, whatever foundation he had laid forward. Obviously, we know, and we don't have to speak their names, individuals who would love to see that very much happen right now. I think I would hope that President Trump has learned from those mistakes and is listening to the right people and allowing the those that are his close confidants to shield him from any of the negative things. And I think also the important thing that is being made here is that if President Trump, which I believe he did, actually agrees and believes of Russia's right to have entered the conflict and done what they do, achieve the goals that they need to, then if Europe does reject or try to covertly scuttle any peace agreements, it gives President Trump the absolute perfect out to say, look, I did everything I could. It's Europe's now. I'm out of it. And then from there, Russia and the United States can continue forward with whatever agreements and ideas that they agree to coming here in this meeting, while Europe will just fall flat on its face, trying to prop up a losing horse. And in the end, it's just going to make Europe far, far worse and give Trump the potential to not only say, hey, it's not my war. I did everything impossible. But guess what? We made new agreements. We've got new business deals, and we're coming out looking like Rose. Paul, was there any other final comments or thoughts you wanted to add to this?
No, though I think that's a good point. I think there's an awful lot more to discuss, but you know, half an hour or so is plenty.
Yeah, I think we got some to talk about in the coming days. Everybody here at the Sirius Report community, as always, thank you for your support. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.